Cyprus is in mourning for former President George Vassiliou, who passed away earlier this week. I spoke to him on several occasions over the last many years. I always remember the year that he got elected to be president. I had to make a decision, who did I go for before the results were finally in, and I plumped for George Vassiliou. As I was shown up to his office in the Kema building, which was alive with his supporters and his entourage, I remember being shown into the conference room, and he said something to one of his colleagues in Greek, to which the colleague quickly said, "Rosie understands Greek." He wasn't fazed at all. He wasn't saying anything that he felt I shouldn't hear. And then I remember a time at CYBC. We were doing live programs back then where we were self-op, as they say, and you put on a record, hopefully about 4 minutes long, that gave you time to dial the number of your next guest, switch them through, and then go live with the interview when the song ended. So I got him on the telephone. I think we were going to talk about the formation of the university. I honestly can't remember. But something else had broken in the news that morning. And so while I had him on the phone setting everything up, I said to him, "George, do you mind if after we finish speaking about the university or whatever it was, I also ask you about whatever the story that was broken was?" And I'll never forget, he said, "My dear, you can ask me anything you like." For me, that sums up George Vassiliou. Unlike today's politicians, many of whom say, "I need the questions in advance," presumably so they can get their subordinates to draft the replies which they will read. Well, he didn't mind. He was happy to have a conversation. And that's what was so very good about having him as a president, because he said what he thought, he did what he thought was right, as you will hear in the upcoming interviews. I found the two longer interviews that I did, first one after the publication of Niazi Kuzulyurek's book, Reflections on the Past and Future, about George Vassiliou. That was recorded in 2014. George, you've got an insight into events, of course, in recent Cypriot history, because you've been the president and therefore privy to a lot of information that possibly many of us have not. We've got a lot of histories of Cyprus that cover some of the facts, but you were aiming, I think, at something just a little bit different.
I accepted the offer by Niazi Kuzulyurek to interview me. Not just an interview, but a long interview, to write a book. And the purpose of that interview was twofold. On the one hand, he asked me some questions about my life and where I was born, how I grew up, what did I do, and how I ended up in being involved in political life. He asked me a few questions, and we talked a little bit about my activities during the presidency and some of the main achievements, one of them which is the university. And of course, we talked a lot about Cyprus, starting, if you like, my views. I mean, I explained briefly, because we are talking about a book that is only 130 pages and covers quite a lot. I think that a book like that, which is brief but goes to the substance, it's more easy to read than something that is bigger and needs more time and so on and so on. So briefly, I talk about the situation before the creation of the Republic, and that, of course, is also related in the 40s particularly, and in the 30s, to the activities of my family, of my parents, being volunteers to the Cyprus Regiment, very active in the
They were active in politics too, weren't they? I mean, they were very firmly ideologues of socialism, I think. How did that affect your childhood and how you grew up and your ideas yourself?
It affected it in the sense that it made me realize how right they were in their dreams and in their fights, because, for example, what my mother did in helping Cypriot, for example, Cypriot soldiers who were wanted to be retired after the end of the war, and the British wanted them to go to serve in other colonies, and they ended up in prison, and because they refused to go, and my mother had to take care of hundreds of families of wives who were coming and wanted to know about them and write letters and so on and so on. Or when there were the big strikes, the mine workers' strikes in 45, 46, that were really at the base of the creation of the labor union or labor movement in Cyprus and so on. Well, that made you realize that working for your country or trying to help your people is something that is necessary. My father has never stopped doing that, either by going as a volunteer, by initiating the movement to go to the British, to the war against the Nazis, and subsequently he made hundreds of speeches on various occasions and so on.
But you yourself went to train as a doctor, and I think initially you weren't planning on a career in politics, were you?
No, but this, well, to start with, there is no such thing as career in politics as far as I am concerned. And secondly, my father was dedicated in the cause. My mother was also, and they were both doctors. So being a doctor has nothing to do against working for the good of your country or for hoping to promote your ideology.
So did you have, even while you were
I was a young boy. When I was a young boy, I left Cyprus in, well, what do you do in politics when you are 15 or 16? And still we were involved in the first ever pupils' strike in Limassol, because the then headmaster was very much a kind of a reactionary in every respect. I mean, just, we're talking in English now, but in Greek there was this big fight between Katharevousa and Motiki.
Which we should explain as the two types of Greek language.
Well, it's not the two types of the Greek language. It's the Greek language and then the
modern Greek.
The Katharevousa was never the Greek language. It was then an artificial creation by some nationalists to so-called clean the language from what the ordinary people spoke. Anyway, so...
And Katharevousa was taught in the schools back then?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
So he wanted you who were not permitted to play football, all kinds of silly things. So we ended up in striking. It was the first ever strike. We were expelled from the school for that. And then, anyway, not to make it too long, then after I finished secondary school, I went to study to become a doctor like my father was. And that's how I went to Geneva for studying medicine. As I tell you, what you said is very interesting. Politics as a career. My parents, who were my example, have dedicated their lives to the cause, and it was never a career. They suffered, they paid for it, but they never made a penny out of it. But they paid in various ways, so you understand. And that's something that I've learned from them. You work for what you hope to make a better world, and you are ready to sacrifice yourself. Like my father was ready to go as a volunteer during the civil war in Greece as a doctor. He suffered terribly. He ended up in the Soviet Union then, and my mother in Hungary, and so on. I was left without any support, and after some efforts, I succeeded in going. My mother got me a visa and went to Budapest. So there, again, as a young man, I helped at the beginning partisans to take them to hospitals and so on, and then went to work in a factory as a worker because they wouldn't permit us to study as Greeks then still at the beginning. And then there I became a lathe operator, and then within the factory I found that the system wanted to create the so-called proletariat intellectuals, that means people from the factories and so on, and not the old class intellectuals. So I thought that was the only way to go to university at the time, and that's when I gave up medicine for economics. But at that time I wanted to study planning. I did not realize what economics was, because planning was what was guiding our lives. And then when I went to the university, they explained to me there is no such thing as planning science, there is economics, and within that you specialize.
So you did the economics and you became a very successful businessman, didn't you?
But later, yes. But while I was doing economics in the university, I saw how things were developing, and I realized that the ideas is one thing, the reality is another thing. And that's when, that's something I point out in the book, that I saw how things ended up with the Hungarian Revolution in '56, and how this was the result of postponement of decision-making. There were goodwill people at the leadership of the party then, but they were afraid to take the steps today. And when after tomorrow they decided to do it, it was already late, and so on and so on. So I got the lesson, and I never forgot it, and I implemented it in all my life, that if you think that something is right, you do it.
And you do it as soon as possible?
As soon as possible, you do it immediately, because the more you postpone it, the more difficult it becomes to solve it.
And that brings us to the Cyprus issue, because really you've just summed it up, haven't you? It's been going on now for so many years.
Yes, and it was going on for so many years, and the reason we have no solution is because there was, on the one hand, the position taken by Denktash that he wanted to have his own states, and that was the Turkish policy as well, which was impossible, and their intransigence was there. And on the other hand, we had our nationalists who did not want to accept that there was an invasion, that there were new facts created on the ground, and that the solution would have to take account of that as well. So it was this conflict between these extreme positions. Extreme, well, each one thinks that was the right position, but the point is that it was not realistic.
And there we come to the crux of the matter, because if you can't be a realist about the situation on the ground, what do you think the chances are of coming to what inevitably has to be achieved, and that's some sort of compromise?
My dear, one of the points I make is that I refer to Mandela, who said that if you want to solve a problem, you must be ready to compromise on the one hand, and secondly, to forgive. Because there were a lot of crimes, there were many errors and mistaken decisions taken by both sides. I'm not talking about the invasion now, which is a tragic event by itself, but later.
Well, and even before.
Yes, because that, the way I clearly point out that in 63, 64, we were the main culprits for the situation. As it is pointed out in the book, we created a democracy and built walls. And since then the walls are there. So you must be ready to forgive and to compromise. And unfortunately, many people on both sides, they're neither willing to forgive or to compromise.
We've had successive governments, many different presidents from different political parties. Is that the bottom line as to why we've never got there? Because one of the interesting things I think you said is that, or you draw attention to in the book, is the fact that we tend to say one thing to people outside Cyprus, our potential allies or whatever, and we say possibly the opposite, but certainly things that are very different for local consumption to the voters.
Well, that, I said it basically for the Greek politicians, because the behavior of the Greek political elite was completely unacceptable for Cyprus. For example, they knew since the early 50s that the solution of Cyprus was then a colony and there was a fight for enosis, that Turkey would never accept enosis, and they made it very clear to Greece, and Greece accepted it. And on that basis, they agreed to the Zurich agreements. And then they imposed it on Makarios with the Zurich-London agreements. So the Greek politicians were ready to compromise, and they did compromise, but at the same time, when they were going to the parliament or making speeches, they would speak about the wishes of the people and the desire for a union and so on and so on. And later, when the Cyprus Republic was created, they supported fully the policies that were followed in 63, 64. They tried to impose a Greek solution by force, and they were defeated. And then after that, again, the Greek politicians, even before, when the Oka fight started, they were talking against the prospect of Oka in private and to Makarios and so on, but publicly they were supporting it 1,000 times.
Well, Greece also, I think, played its role, didn't it, when it came to Papadopoulos' presidency and the Annan plan. You've said that Kostas Karamanlis played Pontius Pilate. What do you mean?
Well, to be honest, we have to make it very clear. Tassos was dead against federation, and he fought against it in every way. But because at the same time he was in favor of the EU, and he knew, and I had told him many times before when we were meeting, before he became president, that in order to get into the EU, we had to prove, because you see, the EU had said that only a united Cyprus will join, but at the same time they left a little opening that if, which was the contribution of Simitis and Kranidiotis, if we face the intransigence of the Turks, you cannot blame us. And that was my position all the time, which I was putting it continuously to the various leaders of the European Union and the various countries and so on. And the truth is that the Turkish intransigence at that time was unbelievable. And Denktash was continuously negative. So I was carrying out the negotiations with the EU and at the same time trying to promote a solution of the Cyprus problem, but it was impossible with the way that Denktash was behaving. If, however, during these efforts, the message was to go out that we are also against the ideas of the United Nations, because that was what it was all, and the proposals of the United Nations, then very simply the European Union would have said that, okay, sort out the problem. When you solve it, you are most welcome. Now, Tassos knew that this is the case, and that's why he made it appear as if he was in favor of a solution. And I explain it in the book that he called me when he became president, and he said to me, George, because you are good friends otherwise for many years, so you know the report by the European Commission will be ready any time now, and there may be some critical points there, and the only one that is able to convince them to erase them and to have the right decisions, the right report, so that we can be accepted by all parliaments, is you. Are you prepared to do it? I said, well, you know that for Cyprus I would do anything.
But you didn't then realise, did you, what was going to happen in the future and the U-turn?
No, of course not. And then I told him, I said, I will do my best, but I said that the first thing they will ask me is, do you accept the Annan plan? And she said, but of course we accept it. I told them. I said, are you serious? He said, yes, of course I'm serious. Well, I said, if you say that you accept the Annan plan, and if you authorize me to say that we will go for the Annan Plan, then I guarantee you that we will get into the EU. And that's what happened.
How did you feel after the referendum and the tearful presidential address? Did you feel as if you'd been stabbed in the back?
We were all betrayed. We were all betrayed, but the main thing is not that how I feel, but that it was Cyprus was betrayed. As a result of the intransigence and the way that Papadopoulos behaved then. So once he decided, once we got into the EU, and he signed and so on, and he was happy, then he immediately came up into the open and said, yes, but we would have accepted it, but there are many mistakes in it. This was always the position. You see, the position of our so-called nationalists was always like that. At the beginning, they were dead against the solution. That solution meant let them get out and give us back everything, and then we see. Then when they realized that this was not possible, they accepted, they said, okay, we are accepting a federation, but a federation with the right content. And by right content, they meant not a federation, but a situation where the Greek Cypriots would run everything. But of course, they never explained that. They said, but we knew what the right content meant. So anyway, Papadopoulos came up and said, well, we have some issues to discuss and so on. And the way this Annan Plan is put in front of us, I'm dead against it. But he said that he's dead against it. Once he discussed it with Greece, and that's where Kostas Karamanlis, you see the uncle, the real Karamanlis, because there is always a difference between the people that create something like Venizelos or Karamanlis and those that follow and may have the same name. And in this case, the real Karamanlis was 100% in favor of the solution, 100% in favor of the Annan Plan. And he said that to me, he said it to everybody, he said it publicly and so on. But Kostas Karamanlis, once he became Prime Minister of Greece, he said, oh, well, we will accept what the Cypriot people decide. He refused to say what the Greek political parties all have been saying, that we are in favor of the Annan Plan, and which they have said it very clearly. So from the moment that Papadopoulos knew that Greece will not interfere, will not take a play, if Greece had said then, of course you will vote, but you must know that our position is that you must accept the Annan Plan, otherwise everything would be in danger. The position would be very different here. But they never said that. And then the other tragic mistake was the fact that Christofias, although Akel was all its life in favor of the solution, because they succeeded in getting into government, and they thought that this is something important for them, when Papadopoulos said to Christofias, well, if you vote yes, you have to get out of the government, Christofias decided to say, oh, well, in that case, I will vote no. And that's why he made his famous speech that we will vote no now to get a better yes tomorrow, and so on. But
and that's the story of the Cyprus problem, isn't it? Every time we have turned down a potential solution,
yes,
the one on offer after it seems to be worse for the Greek Cypriots.
Well,
so we're back to your postponement idea, aren't we?
Well, yes, and also to the fact that when I negotiated, when I was president, and we arrived at the Gallic set of ideas, which, by the way, have been fully accepted by DC. I have articles shared by Clearidis, speeches by him in the National Council, articles by him, by Markidis, who was his deputy, in favor of the Gallic set of ideas. But then we arrived at the elections, and they had nothing else to do. They wanted to find something to criticize me. So Clearidis knew that he would lose the elections without the support of Diko. Diko said, if you want our support, you have to deny everything you said until now. And unfortunately, Clearidis said so. Okay. And his justification to himself was, okay, I will say now no, and then I'll go to a yes afterwards, later.
Is it fair?
And he never went to a yes after. By the time he went back to a yes, 4 years later, it was late. So then they started with the Annan Plan, And then by the time he finished with the Annan plan, he was betrayed by Tassos this time. And goes on like that.
It does seem from the little bits that I've read and from much of what you've been saying that, if you like, the fly in the ointment here always seems to be Diko. They don't have a majority of support in the population, but they play the kingmaker. And then it seems that they're in a position, if anybody does come close to possibly agreeing some form of solution for the future of our country, that for reasons that you may be able to explain, they don't want a solution.
Well, the best explanation is that during the 93 elections, Alexis Galanos, who was then the Secretary General and the President of the House, by the way, from Diko, he gave an interview in which he said very clearly that Diko is a party that only survives on the basis of being part of the government, because he said we must understand that in Cyprus respect is accepted. If you are not able to be in the government, if you are not able to help the people that vote for you, then people will go out to other places. He said it very, very clearly. So he said our power in this Cypriot community, when Vassiliou became president, during the parliamentary elections in 91, went down significantly from what they had when they were in government, because they would not deliver, and I was a president for all Cypriots, not for this or that. They could not accuse me of that, but the point is that they could not expect me to do what they were doing. So Alexis said, and then the so-called rejectionist bloc at the presidential elections in 93, I got 44%, 44.2%, in the first round. Kyriakides got 36.5% or something like that, which was equal to his percentage from the parliamentary elections. He did not succeed in getting anything more. And the so-called rejectionists under Paschalidis got only 18%, and that was Diko, Edek, the Archbishop, and everybody around them. So Galanos said, look, we now have only something like 10%, 11% compared to what we used to have. If Vassiliou wins, then our party has no future. He even said the lie that if we know that he will set up a party in order to get our voters, which if I wanted to set up a party, I would have done it when I was president at the beginning, not towards the end. Anyway, the point is that they had to find something. But the main thing that Diko said is, we are a government party. We are used to be part of the government in one way or another. And unfortunately, in that sense, the trouble for Cyprus was the fact that the two parties that were in favor of a solution and ready to compromise were Akel and Disi. And at the same time, they were opponents ideologically. Not that ideology means much nowadays, but at the beginning it meant much more. If I was successful as a president, it's because during my presidency, during 4.5 years of my presidency, Akel and Disi were supporting my positions 100%. And honestly, in the National Council, we would speak with Kyriakides or with Christofias and so on and say, okay, there is nothing we can do to convince the rejectionists. We follow our line, and if they want to follow, they follow. If they don't follow, bad luck for them. And that's why we were able to make progress. And that's how we arrived at the Gallic set of ideas. And by the way, it's interesting that when Papadopoulos asked me to help him, and he said, but I have accepted the Annan plan and so on and so on. So I was upset. So I told him, Tassos, you are now saying you accepted the Annan plan. But when I was president and we had the Gallic set of ideas, you were dead against them. And you wrote articles and so on and so on and so on and so on. So tell me, is really the Annan plan so much better than the Gallic set of ideas? And you will not believe his answer. He said, George, who told you this stupid thing? The Gallic set of ideas was the best plan we ever had. And it's much better than the Annan plan. And this Annan plan we have now is better than whatever we will get in the future. But when he said that to me, I never realized that he meant it, in the sense that I never realized that he was really intending to go against the annual plan. If I had realized, I would have behaved in a very different way.
But I don't think you're a man for regrets. You do also say...
I'm not for regrets. I'm just saying that, you regret for what happened, but you never give up.
And that's what brings me to asking you about the fact that you still express optimism, and you're quoted as saying that it's very easy to say no because you gain the halo that comes with being a patriot. But such no votes take us in the opposite direction, and yet we still seem to be stuck in this very same sort of thought process that's been going on as long as I've been in Cyprus in the mid-70s. How do we change it?
Simply, now the ball is in the field of President Anastasiadis. He fought for the annual plan. It's known that he is a yes man.
But he seems to be backing off now.
He's not backing off, but he wanted to bring with him everybody, which he will never succeed. And the opposition, the nationalists, they don't give a damn, and they will do anything they can, which... and it's proved by the way Nicholas is behaving, to undermine him. So I hope that he will, on the basis of that, he will be more decisive vis-à-vis the opposition than he was until now.
But it's very hard to do as well when he's still got to keep Parliament on board to push through some of the legislation that the Troika wants to.
If he has a Kelendisi with him, he's okay.
So you're optimistic?
I will stop being optimistic about 5 years after my death.
You did your bit. Can I ask you, George, about the fact that it does seem, again, it's a bit cynical of me to say it this way, perhaps, but it does seem to me, all the years I've been in Cyprus, that every time, if you'll pardon me, a bottom hits that presidential seat, things change in terms of policy.
I hope you don't imply that for me.
No, I don't. But generally speaking, for everybody else it's been true, that things suddenly change to become, how can I keep this chair, rather than what are we doing for the future of our country?
Yes, maybe to some extent it's true. If you ask them, they will never admit that. But in practice, well, look, Cleridis, he tried... in order to get elected, he was ready to. And I excused him for that because I read the Prince of Machiavelli, in which says that the only objective of any leader is power. In that sense, my mistake was that power was never my aim. If power was my aim, then maybe we would have had a solution, because in '93. It would have been very easy to make some kind of moves or say some lies to some people in order to get me supported.
And re-elected.
But which, anyway, I would have been re-elected. The fact that I was not re-elected is another story. It's essentially my fault because, you see, think of that. I was supported only by Yakel, which had only something like 32% in the parliamentary elections 2 years ago. And I got near 45% of the votes on my own. Why? Because 30% other people, which was half of Zico, no, more than half of Zico, wanted a solution and were ready to vote for me, and they appreciated the fact, the effects of the... So when I got this percentage, I thought the victory is guaranteed, and I made 2 errors. On the one thing, I made 3 errors. The one is that at the beginning, I had a policy and I was not prepared to play for power. But that's not an error. I think I'm never sorry for that. It's only an error if I think that if I had done such compromises and re-elected, then we would have had a solution in the next few years, in which case everything is excused. But anyway, put this aside. So after we got the 45%, there were 3,000 students, supporters of me and of Akel, that wanted to come to vote. And I convinced Christofias not to bring them, because why should you waste your money? We will win anyway, number one.
And we should clarify here for people who aren't familiar with the situation is that back then all the big parties did used to fly in overseas students.
Everybody flew in, yes. And we did not fly them in. And when we saw the results, we said, why should we waste, you should waste your money. It was not my contribution. So that was the result of my, so in that sense, power sometimes makes you think not correctly, so you think the victory is safe. Then I made another mistake which upset a lot of people and hurted our people as well when during the period between the first and the second week, I was asked on Monday, I think, by a journalist, what would you do if you were in Mr. Cleary's position when they saw this huge result? And I said I would have resigned. Now, what was the importance of this? This may have been a joke, may have been serious, but the importance of this is that the people that were supporters of Kyrilis and of Diko realized that the game would have been lost and then that would be tragic for Diko. For Risi not, but for Diko it would have been tragic. And went into the fight unbelievably. Our supporters said, well, if the president speaks like that, the victory is certain. There was no extra effort. If I had not said this thing, maybe it would have been different. In addition to that, I know that during the election there have been an effort to modify the results in a way. In Nicosia, we know for a fact that they put a lot of, on many ballots, they put incorrect because they saw that it was a vote for me.
You mean they were added afterwards at the counting?
They were deducted at the counting.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yes, you see, because they would find some kind of excuses to say this is incorrect. And we also knew that in Paphos is always, there has been a lot of ballot rigging. So after the results were announced, I was told by officials that Mr. President, ask for a recount because you have won. And at that time, already the people of Risi and Diko were in the streets shouting, we won, because the results were announced. And I thought very carefully, and I said, if I ask for a recount, even if the recount proves that I am right, we will end up with a civil war. So I said no.
And instead we still have the Cyprus problem. You've also said that if we didn't have the Cyprus problem, a lot of our politicians might not actually have anything to talk about. Now, you're one of the few presidents who did actually try and address many of the issues that a lot of people think are the job of the president. If you set aside the Cyprus problem, we have economic problems, particularly now. We have infrastructure problems. We have all sorts of things that need dealing with that affect the everyday life of the average Cypriot. And it seems that almost, dare I say, many of our presidents and politicians don't really know how to deal with those. So the easy option is to turn eyes outwards to the Cyprus problem.
Yes, do something. Well, I must say that I know for a fact that I have spent more time on the Cyprus issue than any other person. Probably I have spent more time in the 5 years of my presidency than the 10 years of Kyprianou presidency, or even Kyrilis presidency, despite the fact that in the second term I was near him and we supported the whole thing of the Annan Plan, but still there was never that effort, the huge effort that I had done when I was president. And despite that, we had achieved more in all other fields than any why, because we are ready to take decisions and we are not afraid to take decisions.
And do you think it's also because you're a businessman? Because if you can run a government along reasonably sustainable business-like lines, it makes a difference, doesn't it?
Not because I'm a businessman, because I never even... It's because I have learned that in life you have to solve problems. You cannot just postpone them. And that was my lesson when I was a young student, and that was my lesson when I was in business, that you have to solve problems, you have to address issues, and you have to keep people happy and see that there is progress. And progress there was. Now, I don't want to say that because it's now me talking to you, but you know how many people come to me and say, where are the golden years of Vassiliou? Listen, we had growth of the highest growth ever by anybody. We have figures, statistics, even Macarius' time, subsequently, and so on, number one. Number two, despite we had growth, why we had the Gulf crisis with the war, which lost us a year. Otherwise, we would have had 9%, we had 7.5%. Number two, unemployment was nearly 0, 1%. No other country had achieved that. During that time, debts, we had succeeded in reducing nearly to have 35% of GDP was the foreign debts. Standard of living had increased double. So
they were successful years.
They were successful years by any consideration.
4 years later, I met up with him in his office once again. He was definitely getting older, but he was still very happy to have a conversation about the second volume of his autobiography. It covers the years he was in office. That's 1988 to 1993. He joins us now to talk about the book. And first of all, George, Volume 2, does that mean that there's a Volume 3 on the way as well?
Of course, it's not on the way yet, but it will be on the way, because Volume 2, as you just said, covers the period of my presidency. But then, since I'm still alive, that means that there is a period after my presidency, and most probably the third volume will cover at least the 10 years after the presidency and up subsequently until the accession, up to the Annan Plan, more or less. Developments for that period.
You're still interested in and involved in a way in the politics of Cyprus, and particularly the Cyprus problem, aren't you? And you cover a lot about that in the book.
Very much so, and I'm very worried, not only interested but also worried, because I see that after the failure of the Crans-Montana talks, it's not easy to restart negotiations, and if we restart, I don't know from where we will start, and I do know that the United Nations and the Secretary General has sent us very, very clear messages that don't bother me until you are ready.
And do you think there's a chance that we can get ready in the relatively near future?
It's not a question of what I think, it's what we have to do. I think we have to get ready, we have to start talking, and hopefully to reach a solution. And if for some reason we don't reach the solution, then it must be absolutely clear that it is not because of lack of desire or efforts on our side.
There is a movement, it seems to me, in recent years, and also since Crans-Montana, that the rejectionist camp, the people who would like to keep the status quo in Cyprus, are gaining ground to some degree. I think in your book you mentioned about the Greek at the time,
yes,
who...
Lundas,
yes.
the ambassador to Cyprus.
What exactly was his role, in a sense, in trying... Why does Greece want to keep the status quo? Does it still want to?
No. That is not that Greece wanted. The point is that he was one of the best personalities, in terms of well-known and good in his job as an ambassador in the Greek Foreign Ministry. And he had written a letter himself to the then Prime Minister Papandreou, explaining to him why there should be no effort to solve the Cyprus problem then, because his theory, very briefly, was that Turkey is more powerful than us, and therefore any solution may be to the favor of the strongest part, and therefore it's better not to have a discussion, not to make negotiations, and the status quo is better than a solution, because he was under the impression then, and he was saying that privately, that the status quo would have been in our favor, because he was saying that Turkey, under its pressures and problems and so on, could one day either collapse or be much weaker, and Greece will be much stronger, and therefore we should wait until that moment. Well, unfortunately, as you know, it's the other way around that went. Turkey got stronger and Greece got weaker. And also, what is even, and I pointed out in my speech as well, that what was the status quo in 1986 and 85 and 87 and what is the status quo today, it's a hell of a difference, and all to our disadvantage.
Why is it that the Greek Cypriots don't seem to see that the more time passes, in actual fact, the weaker hand they have when it goes to the poker table?
Do you remember what Archbishop Makarios said when, after the disastrous results of the Kofinu conflict and the threat by Turkey that would invade, and Turkey then imposes these conditions? He said the Greek, I don't know exactly how many soldiers were here, but it was a few thousand certainly, that came secretly to Cyprus. The Greek division that came secretly to Cyprus has to withdraw, and it did, and Rivas has to go back to Greece. And all that Turkey asked was implemented, because Makarios was afraid that otherwise there may be invasion, which we had later. So, and also that there should be a solution, Makarios realized, which will not be anymore based on the one state which is really run by the president and not in cooperation with the vice president who was Turkish, as we were used to. And he said that this is the difference between ευκταίο and εφικτό. Ευκταίο means, I mean, you translate it, there is no English word, that what you wish. And εφικτό is what is possible, or rather what is the desired and what is the possible. My decision, I desired to become a billionaire. What is possible is to have a good salary, for example. Okay. But as long as I stick to my desires and hope that one day my desires, who knows, I can play Joker every week and maybe I will win. So I can still keep doing it.
So it's a lack of pragmatism, you're saying, really?
It's a lack of pragmatism. But Makarios said that. He said, all my life, he said, I was fighting and working for the ευκταίο, for the desired. But I now realize that you cannot ask for that. We have to go for the possible, to εφικτό. And because this is a complete change of policy, he said, I decided to submit the whole thing to a referendum, and if a referendum was against, I would resign. And they did a referendum, and you got 95%. At which time, nobody dared say that we want the desired, I mean, wish the desired. But they all accepted that what Makarios said was right. Unfortunately for us, and then, you know, the tragedy of Cyprus, and I've said that many times, was this conflict between the desired and the possible. And the tragedy here is even worse in this sense. The desire doesn't have to change. I mean, there are Greeks who still want to go back to Istanbul, to Constantinople, who say, well, this is what is our place. Okay, this is desired. You can always want that. What is possible is what you can achieve. And so the desire can stay static, but what is possible is not static. Because what is possible today may not be possible tomorrow, and what is possible tomorrow may not be possible after tomorrow.
Now, in your book, how do you deal with how you dealt with the Cyprus issue?
Well, I dealt exactly like that. First of all, I insisted that we have to start negotiations, because as soon as I started talking with government leaders, Thatcher, Reagan at that time, and later Bush, Mitterrand, Genscher, etc., they all said to me the same story, which is now repeated as well. They said, "You're right, it was unjust, the invasion was a terrible event, we were against it, and so on, but it happened. And therefore, what we recommend to you is to sit down and negotiate." And the rejectionists, as you call them, because they refuse to say that they are rejectionists, they say, we reject a wrong solution, we favor a positive solution. Okay, everybody can say anything he likes. So the position, therefore, that they were taking is that essentially they were against the federation. That was late Tassos Papadopoulos. But they would not dare say it, and even Tassos said, "I am in favor of a bizonal, bicommunal federation under the right terms." What were the right terms? It was that it should not be a federation.
This all comes down, does it not, though, to what seems to me to be a basic lack of understanding about a negotiations process.
Yes,
you cannot set preconditions and say A, B and C, or we won't talk. You have to go with something in hand to exchange.
Exactly, my dear. And this is my position. This has always been my position. And in my book and in my speeches and so I kept on repeating that I repeat the story, which I will tell you as well, that in 92 I had the honor to meet Nelson Mandela in Davos. He was the guest of honor there, and we had some half an hour together somewhere. And I asked him, I said, I expressed my admiration for him and everything. And I said to him, how did you succeed in solving the problem of South Africa? So he said to me, look, in order to solve a problem, you have to take a decision that you want to solve a problem. That's number one. And once you decide that you want to solve it, then you have to sit down and negotiate. But you must know that once you negotiate, it cannot be a win-all situation. It has to be a win-win. And that means that you have to compromise. And once you compromise, then you have to agree the compromise as long as you think that it's the best thing you could get. And then you have a solution. And I also refer to an extract from a speech of the late Kennedy, who said that the brave people are ready to compromise, is those that don't dare say what they think, and that they say we insist on not compromising, but in reality is because they are weak and don't have the courage to tell the truth to the people.
And the people really is the bottom line here, isn't it? Because the other thing in terms of the sustainability of any solution, should it come, it needs the support of all Cypriots, of all walks of life.
That is true, but you know, another argument that was used by many people, even those that also said that we'll accept the solution, but we have to make sure we accept it by zone or by communal federation, but we have to make sure that it will not collapse after some time. And I stated very clearly that this is nonsense, because within the EU, once you have a solution within the EU, and both sides accept the EU, the acquis communautaire as it's called, and so on, then what will collapse? The basis of it is there. It doesn't change. It doesn't depend on you. Secondly, you may have a disagreement like they had in Belgium. They were without government for 1.5 years. But nothing collapsed. Belgium was still there. And things went on until the two sides, the Valons and the Flamands, decided to find a compromise solution. That refers to the two-state solution, of course, with the Catalans. But the point is that you can have a situation where you disagree, but the system doesn't collapse. The system is there because it's decided not by you, but by the European Union. All the basics are there, and any future decisions are taken in Brussels. Anyway, your role is to implement them, and then you will implement them.
Let's get back to other parts of the book and your time as president. What particularly did you feel you needed to include in the book? Because I imagine there was an awful lot that you had to say, no, I won't put that in and I won't put this in.
Look, the book consists of two parts, essentially, or rather three. The basic two parts are, the one is the efforts to solve the Cyprus problem, and the other part is whatever actions we took in order to change the situation in the islands to the better. And the third part of the book, which is the end, is the elections and why I lost the elections and some self-criticism about...
We'll come to that in a minute.
Yes, okay.
But about the actual, let's say, the ordinary government part of the book.
The ordinary government part, well, there have been many achievements which it's not up to me to keep mentioning them, but you know, when the presentation took place last week, both Mr. Neophytou expressing his views, but of course being the president of DC, and Mr. Chelepis, member of the Politburo of AKEL, and Mr. Michalis Papetru, a well-known commentator, if you like. They all praised me for what we achieved. As I said, I was a man of vision and so on. But if we come down now to specifics, first of all, something that people don't realize, because they think that it was always there, is that Cyprus became a democratic country for the first time. Because democracy doesn't mean to elect. What democracy meant when Makarios was there, everybody voted for Makarios. So this is not a proof of democracy. The proof of democracy is...
when there's a choice, as much as anything.
Not only when there is a choice, but for example, in Cyprus at that time, if you were a civil servant, you could not go to your job holding another paper than Eleftherotypia, which was the paper of the Democratic Party then. I mean, if you made a mistake of going there with a Haravi or with Alithia was of DC or Haravi was of AKEL, then you would be certain you will never be promoted. And if there was any possibility to get rid of you, they would have done it, and so on.
Well, no, I think a lot of people know that you tried to clean up the civil service and you were fairly successful at it.
Yes, but that is not a question of cleaning up. The concept of democracy, it was nothing to do with the more efficient civil service. That's another issue. Democracy, people learned that, and we put it into a law, the civil servants, and following up to that, even in private employees as well, they were free to read any paper they liked, to believe anything they liked, right, wrong, left, right, left, nothing, etc. They were permitted to stand, to be members of a party, and to stand in an election without losing their job, whether in private sector or in public sector. Now, these things today are taken for granted, but they were not granted. It took a lot of effort in order to ensure that this will go.
So that's one of your major achievements that you're proud of. There are others, I'm sure.
Oh, there are others, but this is the interesting thing about this achievement, is that if you speak to anybody who is 30 or 40 years old, he will think that these things were there. Anyway, that's one. Now, other thing is, take the town planning. There was a law on town planning which was adopted back about 6 or 7 years before my election. But the parties, they adopted the law because they didn't want to vote against the law, but they did not permit the implementation of the law. So it was there. So the anarchic destruction of Cyprus was going on and on and on. So I made sure that this law was at the end accepted by everybody and implemented. And since then there was a real town planning. Now it's fashionable for everybody to say that I'm an environmentalist. Yes, but at the time of I was elected, there were no environmentalists. I remember that the first ever meeting, even before my election, of people that were caring about the environment was down here in this building. And we promoted the idea that the environment is the commonwealth of everybody. So, between other things, in addition to the law on town planning and so on, I created the environment department and appointed the first director of the department. And now everybody speaks about the importance of the Department of Environment, but it didn't exist. There was nothing. So we had to do that.
And the University of Cyprus.
Now I'm coming to that. The University of Cyprus. Cyprus was the only country, not the only, there was another one or two countries in Africa, I think, or Latin America, which had no university, small ones. And there was a reaction against the creation. Can you believe it? They were against the creation of it. Why? Because they were saying this is a slogan by the people that are against Greece, because if we create a university in Cyprus, we will cut the umbilical cord between Greece and Cyprus, and therefore we are against it. And I had to say no, it will help the relations between Greece and Cyprus, as we know now, but I had to fight. And in the parliament it took time, and even after it was established, they were making difficulties for me. The university should have been started operations in 91, but because they were making all kinds of difficulties, we moved it on to 92, and then when we had the celebrations about it, there was a lot of fight against it. Today, everybody is a fantastic supporter of the university, and since then there have been so many universities and so on, and we know that why it's important. But therefore, what I try to say is that the fights we had to make were fights that you consider them today that it's not serious. I mean, was it possible that people don't want the university? Is it possible that people want to destroy the environment, etc., etc.? Or is it possible, coming now to what you said about the civil service, that the civil service, we want the civil servants not to work, but it's not a question of we want them not to work. We wanted to fight bureaucracy. We wanted to make things easier for people. To give you a small example, in those days, you had to renew your license for owning a car every 6 months. So every 6 months, huge queues were created all over. So we abolished that. Okay, so no queues necessary. What you will not believe, I'm sure you have a car, and I'm sure you drive, and if you go at 7 o'clock in the evening or 8 and the petrol station is closed, you can still fill it up and pay through that. It was not there. I had to fight. The petrol stations were against ATMs being provisioned there. I had to fight to implement it because I wanted to make life easier. And now everybody says it's a good thing. Can you imagine petrol stations without ATMs? No. But it was very much a reality.
And we should say petrol stations that closed at 5 or 6 p.m. and didn't open again until 7 in the morning.
Yes, exactly. So whatever you look at, there were so many things that were there. And I was reading a book by a Greek philosopher, Ramphos, who said the secret of bureaucracy is that people don't like to see changes in their lives. Yeah, I'm used to this. I have learned 1 and 1 makes 2. I don't want to know that 1 and 1 may be, sometimes it makes 2.5 or something else. So I want to stick to what I know.
And you need vision to change that.
And you need vision to change that. And this is exactly, if you like, what I believe, and I could keep on talking about it for hours and hours, but what was the achievement of my presidency is that I had a vision. I mean, one example, ECU. In those days, there was no euro, and Cyprus was not a member of the European Union. but there was the ECU, means European Currency Unit, which they created in order to help transactions between them. And Cyprus was the first country in Europe which was not member, because the members of the EU then were 6, and then later they became 9. So any other European states, there were about 30 or 40 of them, Cyprus was the first, as a result of my pressure, to decide that the Cyprus pound would be pegged to the ECU. It was not a peg in the sense that it would be obligatory, but from the moment we did it, we created a feeling of stability. Cypriots knew that their money has a certain value, 1.7 ECU to the pound. And that was that. It could go to 1.6 or 1.8, but it was that. And it helped the economy to go up. The efforts that I made to reduce the taxes. My people in the Ministry of Finance were saying, but President, okay, we all want less taxes, but how will we survive? How we will get enough money in the budget? And I told them that don't worry, we will end up in getting more. So we reduce the taxes, but increase the incomes. How? Because we reduce the tax evasion. With high taxes, there is hedging with evasion. With lower taxes, everybody prefers to be okay with his government, and there was no evasion.
Can we come now to the regrets, the mistakes? Because you're very frank, I think, in the book.
Yes. Look, in essence, I never fought an election. When I was candidate the first time, I was fighting for it for a whole year. When I was president, people around me were telling me, President, we have to think about elections. No, we have meetings in New York, which is important for our problem. And I have to give priority to that. And that lasted for the whole of March until end of August. I've been continuously fighting for Cyprus. And of course didn't even think that there is such a thing as election. And subsequently the Secretary General wanted us to go back. And I went back. DC and Rico and the DEC refused to come before they came, but then they said, no, we're not coming. And they started electioneering, but we were fighting for Cyprus until we reached decision 789, which was in November 92. And even after that, instead of coming to Cyprus, I stayed in New York for a long time. Then I went to Brussels in order to get it approved, the Galley set of ideas, to get it accepted and supported by the EU, which I did. So in essence, whatever efforts I've made for my re-election was done something in January, which is, if you say that now, they will say you are talking nonsense. That is one of the mistakes. Now, why did I do that? Because I was under the illusion, if you like, that people will recognize that, well, what is important is to solve the Cyprus problem. So to whom should we give priority? To elections or to the Cyprus problem? And I thought that people will realize that is important. And in actual fact, people realized, because in the first round, I received 45%, and Mr. Klididis only 35%. So that means, and Akel and others people who were supporting me, well, they may have had 30 or 32%. So from 32 to 45, it's a hell of a lot of people that recognized what we were doing. They sensed that we were on the way to solution and also on improvement of the economy and so on. In that time we had 10% growth and so on. And they expressed this appeal. But when it came to the second round, in weeks' time, then already before that, the late Glafkos thought that it is his last chance. So he decided to abandon the Galley set of ideas and to support the idea of Rico and Kyprianou, who was dead against the solution and dead against the set of ideas. And even so, they won the election, if they won the election, by a few hundred votes.
But that's partly because you didn't do what a lot of people have done in the past and fly people over from abroad.
They told me there are 3,000 students that are ready to come. And I told them, why waste your money? That is one thing. These 3,000 would have been enough. But also, there was an effort, a lot of votes were considered as invalid because in some way, if you put a mark here, and if this went outside the box a little bit, it's nothing. In reality, it's accepted now. But then they said it's invalid. So there was this thing happening. We had no party to take care of it. And of course, Akel did, Scotty did, but it was not enough. We did not have our delegate. And they were coming to me and saying, President, be careful, there is a lot of this happening. We have to ask for recount. And I thought seriously, the people who were against me, mainly part of DC and DICO, had started celebrating that they may have won. And I realized that even if we had recount, and assuming, I was sure I would have won, but with a few hundred votes difference. But this would not have never been accepted by the others. It was the government asked for recount, and then they must have did this or that, and so on. And essentially, Cyprus would have been divided into two fightings. And I said, no, I prefer to lose the election rather than lose
set
the country.
People against each other.
Yes.
All right, so the book has been published, now obviously in Greek.
Yes, and because a lot of people have expressed an interest in having the book in English, but the book is not in English, so I decided to have it translated now. The translation has started. Who will be the editor? I would prefer to have an editor in the UK in order to ensure the wider, because I'm interested in promoting the Cyprus problem internationally. But I don't know yet. But anyway, the translation is on, so if all goes well, maybe in a year or year and a half, there will be an English
version. In the meantime, it is in Greek in our local bookshops.
In our local bookshops, yes.
It's been a pleasure talking to you once again, George. Good luck
My
with
dear.
Volume 3.
Yes, well, the Volume 3, as I said, it should be interesting because it will cover the first 5 years, which I consider as dead years, of the cooperation between DC and DICO. There were no negotiations, there were nothing. And then it's the second 5 years at which there were negotiations, and there were also the intensive effort to go and put Cyprus into the EU, for which I was in charge. So this 10 years period is clearly divided with the same president, but not the difference was that in the case of the first 5 years, Kyprianou had a very big role to play, who was against it. In the second 5 years, there was no Kyprianou there, and Clearidis with us and others was able to support the whole process. And then after that we come to the unplanned years, which is tragic for this country. Unfortunately, the election gave the result that you know, and for which you are still paying.
Your third volume is going to cover as well, I'm sure, the work you did to get Cyprus into the European Union, because that has had a great effect on everyday life in Cyprus.
It had, and between us, one of the reasons I wanted very much to put Cyprus into the EU was in order to secure the future of Cyprus. But unfortunately, we voted no to the Annan Plan, the majority at least. But it was interesting that the late Tassos Papadopoulos, who was the then president, he never dared say that he's against the solution. On the contrary, he was saying that I support the Annan Plan and I will vote for it. But only once we were in, then he said, yes, but we want to correct this and this and that, and then we ended up with what we had.
The promised European solution that never came.
Yes, exactly.
We'll look forward with great interest to the next volume, George, and as I say, a pleasure talking to you.
It's
Thank
my
you very
pleasure,
much.
and Thank you for your time.
The late and much lamented former President George Vassiliou. And I can tell you that the next volume is out. It's entitled Agonas enantia στην αδράνεια. Roughly translated, that's the struggle against inactivity.